Why I'm on your smartphone. I suppose I don't really have to explain to the highly intelligent members of this group that stupidity exists in this world. Human beings are stupid, some more than others, and a particularly stupid assumption formulated by certain members of this species is that because I focus on the collapse of the ice, I care only about ice. Nothing could be further from the truth, and you really shouldn't assume things about people you've never met unless you have a near perfect track record of always being correct in your assumptions. I focus on ice because I care about all the other things on this planet that are not ice, the living planet, or biosphere, particularly the non-human parts of this beautiful biosphere. This may be lost on younger generations, but there used to be some sort of ideal on the, largely non-commercial, web to pick a topic of some expertise, study it and get better, and share that knowledge with the world through your website. Then at least you knew quite a lot about something, meaning you had something to contribute to others. I must admit I feel kind of old having to explain this to young people at this point. For me, the study of sea ice wasn't a random choice or a shot in the dark. I've always been interested in climate and ecology, well, since my mid-teens, but only after the complete breakdown of the UN climate talks in Copenhagen in 2009, did I slowly, years later, realize there was something very significant going on in the Arctic, with sea ice in the Arctic basin. Today, it is the most obvious sign of our crazy climate change. It is arguably the most dangerous development in all of human history on Earth. And through a deep focus on this topic, you may actually see most of the things that are wrong, aka completely fucked up, with this species and the way it goes about its business. I do understand that technically, the professional climate scientists know a whole lot more than me about various parts of the climate systems. That goes without saying, and I'm not claiming superior knowledge to anyone. But I also know that from the very onset of human civilization 10,000 years ago and to the creation of the IPCC, UN Climate Panel, in 1988, humans only emitted half of our CO2. The other half we chose to emit even after we had a climate panel and after we knew carbon emissions weren't the smartest thing to increase and extend into the future. And that was I think in 2015, or about 2 or 3 years ago. This means a lot more carbon was added to the ocean and atmosphere after 1988 and the IPCC startup, than before humans realized the need for a climate panel. So already there you could ask, then what's the bloody use of that panel, when all it does is increase those carbon emissions? Well, that's very naive and egotistic of you. You have to think of the other guys, for instance those hard-working guys in the fossil fuel industry. They founded a lot of the climate research institutes, and these days they are somehow allowed to carry on with their dirty business. I know my local Green Party here in Norway wants to let them go on pumping the sweet oil and gas for 20 more years. But in 2038 they need to stop, they say. That's generous. Climate scientists, in and outside the IPCC, have very ambitious climate computer models, in which they try to understand every tiny bit of the climate system so the models can be run over and over with different settings and variables, in order to say something about our future climate. IPCC and other climate reports are then based on these model runs. The problem is really the old CISO dilemma, or the dilemma of only getting shit out when you put shit in. For instance, they don't want to include emissions from hydrates or permafrost in the models, because these emissions are natural and or hard to estimate numerically. They also can't possibly model an unknown feedback loop, or an unknown strengthening of a known feedback loop, or any unknown combined effects of a whole bunch of feedbacks acting together. So in a nutshell, these models fail exactly because they are far too ambitious. In order for them to work satisfactory for their purpose, which would be to keep humanity safe from extreme climate danger, they would have to be all-knowing and omnipresent, like our dear God-bearded Father in the sky with diamonds. So they fail because of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld would have put it. But back to the ice. After studying Arctic sea ice for some time, I've found you have essentially two measures, volume and extent, and from two nations, Japan and USA. Extent is the ice cover in 2D. Volume is the 3D space filled with frozen water. Arctic sea ice is collapsing much faster in thickness and volume than in 2D surface ice cover. Another way of saying that is the ice collapses way slower in 2D surface ice cover, or extent. Therefore, I presume, all the IPCC reports and all the scientists saying stuff about ice in the media, they talk about 2D ice cover, which seemingly isn't disappearing very fast. They also seem fixated on September sea ice, or 2D ice cover at its lowest at the end of the summer melt season. There were fears that this part of the year would be ice-free so many decades before the climate reports said it would, so the latest IPCC report put in a sentence in small print, requiring 5 consecutive years to have ice-free September days in order for the Arctic to be called summer ice-free. Sitting in the bus through the tunnels down to the fjord today, I realized you could have a full 4 years of all-season ice-free Arctic Ocean, and yet the UN Climate Panel would still not have recognized that as even summer ice-free yet. Cover your ass at its finest. But okay. There is a consensus that the much faster collapsing volume trend is the key trend to study if we want to know anything at all about future sea ice in the Arctic. And yet even this trend is mostly followed, and graphed, through its September minimum volume levels. This ignores the fact that the Arctic sea ice volume is collapsing 12 months a year. Instead of September minimum ice volume, I have personally chosen to remove the seasons altogether, by calculating a moving 365-day average volume, or annual average. The annual volume can be seen in graphs to go down close to 365 days a year. In other words, you have a steady collapse towards zero sea ice every day of the year. With all the talk about climate change since well before the foundation of the IPCC in 1988, and with all the focus on global warming and loss of sea ice these days, I've never seen any other person on this planet presenting an Arctic sea ice volume graph like the one attached below. This is a graph that shows annual volume for every day from the 1st of January 1980 to yesterday in a continuous graph, and with an added trend line that does hit zero at some point, at which there will be no sea ice at all in summer, autumn, winter or spring. The extremely dangerous phase of climate change starts at zero ice all year, or rather a couple years prior, when you have all open water through the entire midnight sun period, where the sun will be heating the Arctic Ocean 24/7. Yes, that's 24 hours a day. Finding the likely year of no ice, therefore, ought to be the most important task of climate change research, and yet, the IPCC cannot do that simple task. Not in their 5 IPCC reports, not in their YouTubes or press releases, and no climate scientist on Earth seems able to talk about this, much less graph it. As I mentioned, when chatting with a member of the Fourth Estate, they all seem lost in their 2D world, and they are not allowed to talk about all year ice-free yet. First you have to have an ice-free September day, for 5 years in a row. Climate scientists have so far failed so miserably, and they've failed each and every one of us non-scientist humans so completely, either through all faults of their own, or with the help of the scandalous useless media, that this guy with an iPad in the mountains has chosen to support the current efforts to have them all sacked from their institutions and put on the street by the bankers. They are no more useful to us than a bus driver who doesn't want to drive a damn bus, or a hairdresser who cannot dress hair. You're fired.